I see Richard's hand. Richard Black, Schiller Institute.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, the freedom of the press, as we know it, has begun to include freedom of the major media, not to include certain stories and facts which they deem going against mass media groupthink. I'll give you one example and one piece of background. 5 days ago, President Trump gave an interview on the Fox network, and he said the following, quote, referring to the Russiagate allegations, quote, "This was a coup. This was an attempted overthrow of the United States government. I think it's possibly the biggest scandal in the political history of our country. I think it's far bigger than Watergate." And then he elaborated. Then he broke in when the interviewer was making some anti-Russian comments and said, "President Putin of Russia made the statement that it's great to be able to help us with Kim Jong-un and North Korea. We all want to get rid of nuclear weapons. Russia wants to. China wants to. President Xi has been a great help." And it went on from there. Now, he made 2 points, therefore. Number one, that there has been an ongoing coup against the President of the United States. Number two, that there should be negotiations to eliminate nuclear weapons, not in North Korea, but in China, the United States, and Russia. One would think that these would be highly newsworthy comments. But a perusal of the mass media throughout Europe and the United States found that aside from Fox TV, where the interview took place, there was no coverage whatsoever. So you say, how is this possible? The chief executive of the United States, the commander-in-chief of America's nuclear warheads, says that there has been an ongoing coup against the President of the United States and no coverage? Seems absurd. Well, I'll give you a bit of a background fact. There's a watchdog organization called Integrity Initiative. It's based in London. It's an arm of a so-called NGO called the Institute for Statecraft. Now, the so-called NGO, which here in the UN we're experts at, you have to be independent of all governments. This NGO in London is 95% funded by NATO, the United Kingdom, and the US State Department. And it's completely intertwined in personnel with such highly political think tanks as the Jamestown Foundation, the Atlantic Council, etc., anti-Russia, anti-China by their outlook. And then as we investigate, we find out on the internet that this Integrity International functions by what are called clusters. What is a cluster? A cluster is a group of journalists and think tank operatives in various newspapers who are called upon by this Integrity International when it's time to get out a certain line. And if you read their material, it defines what? Vis-a-vis the West, Western Europe, the United States, Russia is the enemy, China is the enemy. So here we have a situation where a so-called NGO is dictating a political line which seems universal. So the situation becomes, you go outside, you pick up a copy of the New York Times, and you're hoping to get the news. And you find out rather than getting the news, you're getting a cluster. Well, the good news is that if you talk to the American people in Alabama and in Iowa and in Wisconsin and in Oregon, number one, they don't want the coup. They think the Russiagate business was evidence-free, which it was, and they want friendly relations with China and friendly relations with Russia. So here's a case in which the media, the mass corporate media, almost universally is being controlled by something other than the objective standards, which of course all journalism schools would put forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Pamela.
Sorry, I do understand the point, and I respectfully only want to disagree on one point. As you were speaking, I just thought, really, did CBS not cover that? And there's a full story about President Trump saying this was a coup. He complained to Fox News' Sean Hannity. If there are a lot of complaints about how much every news organization can cover. I actually think it's going in the opposite direction because we're now streaming and everybody, there's a lot that the mainstream media does cover. But in any case, I understand some of your other points, but I respectfully disagree. We do cover, if anything, sometimes people complain we cover too much of what's on Twitter.
Thanks, everyone. Tinatin.
My name is Tinatin Chaparidze. I'm from Columbia University. I'm a master's student at the Harriman Institute. First of all, thank you very much for organizing this event. I had a question for Ms. Zakharova regarding the stable RUNET law. My understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that this is an attempt on the Russian Federation's part to try to protect its sovereignty in the digital domain and the information space, more specifically. Are you, however, concerned that this may impede free flow, democratic free flow of information in the internet domain, particularly on Russian territory? Thank you.
Maria.
You know, I received, if I may, yeah? Yeah. I received many questions, and even Pamela asked me this similar thing before our conversation, what this law is about. And the thing is, it's not about Russia withdrawing itself from the world internet. Of course not. But, come on, guys. If you have TV, if you have computer, if you have radio, just switch on and just watch and hear what Washington is telling us. Each day, from each, not program, but from each governmental structure, within last, I don't know, 6-7 years, we are hearing aggressive rhetoric towards our country, our people, our way of living. They are very, very aggressive. They are trying to convince not themselves, I mean American politicians, but also the rest of the world, that Russia is bad, that Russia is not in the family, I mean the world family, that Russia should be withdrawn from banking system, from political system, from each and every corner and part of our life. And they were threatening us, and they are still threatening us to get us out of civil world, as they call it, including, as I mentioned, banking system and other parts of today's world. So this law is not about Russia leaving internet. Of course not. We want to be a part, and we are actually a part of today's world system and life, starting from education, space, economy, I don't know, you name it. But if those threats, which we are hearing from American politicians, from NATO, for example, and others, will be fulfilled and realized, we want to be prepared just as a country, just to have a communication within our society and within our country. We want to be prepared because, you know, we've heard so much from Congress, from Senate, from the White House, from different politicians, and, you know, enough is enough. We really very thankful, and we really, and I mentioned, and not only me, but other distinguished representatives today mentioned so much about democracy and United States, who actually was the pioneer in 20th century in different fields, especially in freedom of speech and freedom of journalism, and we're really very thankful to them because we learned this lesson, and it really, I think, enriched our life in my country, because for many years we had this experience of freedom of speech, etc., etc. So within 20-30 years we learned this very well, and we actually moving in this direction, and really grateful that we are actually joined, for example, democratic world, etc., etc. But we noticed that while we were developing, while we were making our economy stronger, we became not very welcomed. And it's strange because, as I mentioned about, I think, 10 years ago, globalization was the major thing which was presented here in in the United Nations headquarters as the major task and goal that we have to move in this direction. And the globalization was, as an idea, as a concept, includes all the fields and corners of our today's world. But now we're watching opposite movements, that our common world, our information sphere is divided into different parts. So it's just one more time. It's not about living, no. I mean, it's about being prepared. And we stressed one more time, several times, lots of times, what we want to be, and we want to build a joint world, open world. But it should be done in a very respectful way. We want to be on the same positions as other world members. And we actually did a lot. We invested a lot as a country in science, in education, in, I mentioned space, in other spheres of our life to be respected. And we never start, for example, World War. We never been aggressive. We have our own experience of living. So just want to stress it one more time.
Thank you, Maria. So, Carla's there. Oh yes, it's right time, Carla. You are welcome. Just wait a second. They will operate the mic. Can we turn on the mic, please? Thanks. Mm-hmm.
I have two questions. One might have been addressed by Alison Smale, but she's gone, so I'll raise it anyway. And it regards Article 19, the ability to receive information. And I know that the Commission on Disarmament was canceled because one of the Russian delegates, or many, were denied visas by my government. And this then denies journalists access to information on the entire Disarmament Commission. This is, one could say, a sin of omission, or a de facto form of limiting access to information. And I would like to hear whatever comments you can offer about the abuse by the host country of visas in order to determine the activities which really occur at the United Nations. And then again, this would have to do also with probably the problems with visas coming out of countries such as Venezuela. I also have a follow-up on that. This is something very confusing. 2 years ago, I went to North Korea. When I came back and published an article, I found an almost impenetrable wall of hostility on the part of people who had never been to North Korea. And this, of course, had to do with other journalists who insisted I hadn't seen what I'd seen and so forth. This, of course, is Western Europeans were the most disappointing of all. Many Americans were also part of what I would call a very frightening and impenetrable refusal to hear different opinions. And I just would add to that, when Ray Bana of the New York Times published the story of the it wasn't the story, the details of the El Mozote massacre, he was fired. And then again, we all know about the case of, in 2003, Judith Miller having consistently published disinformation, which supported the administration's determination to attack Iraq. So we talk about press freedom, but there is so much control of the press, even in this country, or perhaps especially in this country. What can be done to actually make a reality out of what is a very noble idea, which is educating the public so it can make informed decisions about voting and acting?
Thank you, Carla. First of all, I wanted to tell you that the visa issue was not the point of our discussion today.
I mean, Carla, you're quite right. I want to support you in these remarks, and I will explain why. You know that my deputy, who is actually the deputy director of the Information and Press Department of Russian MFA, who are actually in charge of information, world information, international information programs, who is a very active diplomat and a very active member of international conversation on this issue, was not issued U.S. visa on time. And he could not come today for this meeting. But he applied on time, but he did not get the visa on time. So probably if everything will be fine, he can do it tomorrow. But we were actually expected him to come yesterday. So just I had a very interesting dialogue with one friend of my very close friend. She is from United States of America. That was about 2 weeks ago, and that was a huge surprise for her, how long U.S. Embassy in Russia, in Moscow particularly, is issuing U.S. visa for Russians. Can you imagine? 300 days. It's 2019. Hello. We're discussing new technologies. We can reach each other through internet all over the world in 1 sec. 300 days. It takes usually U.S. Embassy in Moscow to set the date for the interview. Not to issue visa, but to set the date for the interview. 300 days. So I think that what you are saying is absolutely right. And another last example, it's about political world, the world of political issues, just and very close connected to information and freedom of speech, etc., etc. It's about Crimea. Everybody within 5 years is talking about Crimea. Reports, sanctions, conversations, speeches, and statements. Nobody visited Crimea. Mostly those who are the most active in these discussions. So we are asking, please come to Crimea. We will provide assistance. You can do it on your own. No, it's somehow forbidden for international journalists to go there. Okay, we ask, for example, other countries to invite Crimean people to come to different forums and symposiums and meetings just to present their position on what is going on there. They are not issued visas, just forbidden. And that was a real thing. About a month ago, I took part in a conversation which was organized in Geneva by Swiss International Press Center, and one of the topics was Crimea and human rights, etc., etc. And Crimean journalists tried to get visas to come there, and one of them was forbidden. And so the only way for him was to reach the international community in the press center in Geneva was via internet. So we made like broadcast from Crimea to Geneva, but he was not issued visa. So I think that your remark has very close connection to the to our 2 days conversation, because this is the example. It's a real life. It's from reality what is going on and how these things are fit together. Thank you.
I just wanted to add that we keep on updating everyone about those visa issues on Foreign Ministry webpage and even Russian mission to the UN.